7 in the morning, my son-in-law parked a moving truck across the entrance to my house, as if the home already belonged to him. He stood there looking at me, smirking, while a stranger in a suit walked up my steps and handed me a piece of paper saying that the house I'd lived in for 30 years was no longer mine. An old man of 67, white-haired and all alone. In his mind, I was the easiest prey he'd ever come across. I didn't shout. I didn't lunge at him either. I just looked down at the foreclosure notice, then looked past his shoulder toward my only daughter, standing with her arms crossed beside the moving truck, silent, like a stranger. I hoped, desperately, that she would open her mouth and say this was all just a joke. She said nothing. Then I asked one single question. The smirk on my son-in-law's face held for exactly 3 seconds. Then it died. Because he just remembered the one thing he'd completely forgotten, while spending 9 months planning how to steal my house. He forgot what I'd done for 33 years before I retired. And that was the biggest mistake of his life. My name is Walter Beaumont. I'm 67 years old, and I live on Hartwell Lane on the quiet side of Asheville, North Carolina, in a brick house with green shutters and a half-acre of grass out back. That takes me a full afternoon to mow. I bought this place 30 years ago, back when a man with a steady paycheck and patience could still afford a yard and a little quiet. I retired 4 years ago. Before that, for 33 years, I was a forensic auditor. I read other people's financial lies for a living. Let me say that part again, because it matters later. A date that arrived before the thing it described. A signature that looked right to everyone except the person trained to know better. I helped build the cases that put a lot of people away. I was good at it. I was very, very good at it. And my son-in-law, a man named Trevor Maddox, looked at me, white hair, reading glasses, a garage full of half-finished furniture, and decided I was an easy mark. He decided wrong, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Fraud never starts on the day you find it. It starts months earlier, in little moments that feel like nothing while they're happening. So let me take you back. My daughter, Renee, married Trevor about 5 years ago. He was 36, good-looking in a rehearsed sort of way, always in clothes that cost more than a man should spend when his job title is private investment advisor. I'd spent enough years around money to know what that phrase often hides. It means somebody collects cash from people who don't ask hard questions and promises them returns that don't exist. But Renee looked happy, so I held my tongue. That was my first mistake. I had a low, quiet feeling about Trevor from the start. Nothing dramatic. Just the hum of an old instinct that never fully shuts off, no matter how long you've been retired. He asked the wrong questions. Not about my health. Not about my late wife. Not about whether I was lonely in that big house. He asked about square footage, about property values on my street, about whether I'd ever looked into a reverse mortgage. I noticed. I always notice. I just told myself a happy daughter was worth a little discomfort. My second mistake came about 4 months before the truck showed up in my driveway. Renee started visiting. A lot. After 2 years of holiday phone calls and the occasional Sunday supper, she suddenly appeared every other week, full of warmth, always with a reason. She helped me clear out the attic. She brought groceries I hadn't asked for. She sat at my kitchen table and asked about my blood pressure with the focus of someone who'd very recently decided my health was urgent. She was my daughter. I wanted it to be real. God help me. I wanted it so badly to be real. But I saw the things. I saw how her eyes flicked to her phone every time I mentioned anything to do with money. I saw the afternoon she asked to use my printer, and I walked back in to find her at my desk instead, not at the printer, at the desk where I keep things. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself 33 years of watching people lie had ruined my ability to trust the one person I most wanted to. If you've ever caught your own gut warning you about someone you love, and you talked yourself out of listening because the truth was too heavy to pick up, then you already understand the next part of this story better than I'd like you to. Then Trevor started tagging along. He'd stroll through my house like a man counting inventory, ran his hand along my kitchen counter, stood at my back window looking out at the half-acre, asked me, with that friendly little tilt of his head, whether the land behind the house had ever been split into separate lots. I answered. I was polite, and the whole time, I watched Renee watch him. I watched her face go smooth and empty every single time he steered the talk toward real estate. Something was wrong. I just hadn't named it yet. The morning it all came apart was a Tuesday in late September. I was on the back porch with my coffee when a gray sedan I didn't know pulled up out front. The man who climbed out was somewhere in his 40s, dark suit, holding a folder with the careful gravity of someone trained to look official. He knocked twice. When I opened the door, he told me he was from a company called Blue Ridge Asset Recovery. He was very sorry, he said. He knew this was hard. Then he handed me the folder. Inside was a notice of foreclosure. According to those papers, I had refinanced my home 7 months earlier and pulled $260,000 in equity out of it. I had missed 4 payments in a row. The house was in default. I had 30 days to make it right or lose it. I read it twice. Slowly. The way I trained myself to read a document when I needed to understand every word before I let myself feel anything. Then I looked up at the man on my porch. I never refinanced this house, I told him. He shifted his weight. Sir, the application has your signature. We have it on the loan agreement. Who notarized it? He blinked. He flipped through his copy. A name Howard Pell, licensed notary, registered out of Charlotte. I thanked him. I told him my attorney would be in touch. I shut the door, and I stood alone in my front hall for exactly 1 minute, breathing slow and even, the way I used to before walking into a room with someone who thought they'd thought of everything. Then I called my daughter. She picked up on the second ring, bright, easy. Hey Dad, what's up? There's a foreclosure notice on my house, Renee. Somebody pulled $260,000 against it 7 months ago. I need you and Trevor to come over, now. There was a pause. Short, but I heard it. The kind of pause I'd spent a whole career learning to hear. Oh my God, she said. Dad, that sounds like identity theft or some kind of scam. We'll come right over. Here's the thing I've never been able to fully explain to people. In that single second of silence on the phone, before she said one word, I already knew. I knew the way you know a forgery, before you can prove it, a feeling in the body that arrives before the evidence does. And I spent the next 40 minutes praying I was wrong. A father can hold 2 things at once, you know. Certainty and hope. They don't cancel each other out. They just sit there together and ache. They arrived 40 minutes later. Trevor came through the door first, wearing concern like a man who'd practiced it in the mirror. Renee stood just behind him. And that little detail, her standing behind him in my own house, letting him lead, told me everything about how this was going to go. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, folded his hands, arranged his face into something that was supposed to look like sympathy. Walter, I'm so sorry. This is obviously fraud. We need to call your bank right now and freeze everything. He reached for his phone. I actually know a guy who handles exactly this kind of donk. Before we call anyone, I said, I'd like to see the full refinance application. The whole package. His hand slowed on the phone. The foreclosure notice should have the lender's contact, he said. We can request the file through. I already have a copy. I slid the folder across the table. I'm looking at the signature on page 4. He looked at the folder. He didn't touch it. It's close, I said. If you didn't know my handwriting, you'd accept it without a second thought. The W is good, the B is good. But I've been signing my name for 67 years, and there's something I do every single time. When I cross the top of my capital B, I lift the pen and break the stroke. Always have. Since I was a boy. This signature doesn't have the break. Renee's hand, flat on the table, curled in just slightly at the edges. And there's the notary, I went on, keeping my voice in the same flat, even place I used to live in during depositions, Howard Pell. I pulled his commission number this morning. It expired 11 months ago. He hasn't been a licensed notary since last October. No real mortgage company processes a loan on an expired notary stamp unless nobody was looking carefully at the paperwork, which somebody was counting on. The kitchen had gone very quiet. There's one more thing, I said. I got this foreclosure notice this morning, but I checked my mail yesterday, and there was nothing, which means somebody has been intercepting my mail, redirecting my statements so I'd never see the late notices coming. And a mail forwarding request needs a signature too. I looked at Trevor, then I looked at my daughter. I'd be very curious whose name is on that one. Nobody spoke. I want to stop here for a second, because I've thought about this moment more than any other. In that silence, I wasn't feeling triumphant. People assume I must have. They picture some cold satisfaction. But what I actually felt, sitting there watching my daughter stare at the wood grain of a table I'd had since she was small, was grief. Plain, heavy grief. The kind that fills your whole chest and has nowhere to go. Trevor stood up. The sympathy was gone. What replaced it was harder, cornered. You're throwing around some serious accusations, Walter. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, I said. I'm describing what the documents show. There's a difference. I spent 33 years making sure I knew that difference. He looked at Renee. One of those long married looks, a whole paragraph folded into a glance. She kept her eyes on the table. We should talk to a lawyer, Trevor said, before this goes any further. That, I told him, is the first sensible thing you've said all morning. They left, and I sat at my kitchen table and gave myself exactly 5 minutes to feel it. Not the anger could wait. The anger was useful and I'd need it later. The grief. The specific, hollow grief of a father who just watched his only child stand behind a man who tried to rob him and say nothing, nothing at all. Then I closed that door inside myself, and I went to work. I want to be honest with you, because this is the part where I think a lot of people would have broken. If that were me on the other side of this, if I were just an ordinary retired man who'd never spent a day learning how fraud is built, I think I would have panicked. I think I might have wondered if I really had signed something and forgotten. I think I might have been so ashamed and so confused that I'd have taken whatever quiet deal Trevor offered just to make it stop. And that, right there, is exactly what he was betting on. He wasn't betting on my weakness. He was betting on my embarrassment. Most predators do. But I still had a phone full of people who owed me 33 years of professional respect. By noon I'd reached an old colleague named Diane Castellano, who now worked financial crimes for the state. I didn't ask her to do anything she shouldn't. I just walked her through what I'd found and asked, plainly, whether the name Trevor Maddox showed up in anything open. She called me back in 2 hours. She couldn't discuss case files, she said carefully. But what she could tell me was that I needed to see a real estate attorney today. Not tomorrow, today. I already had the appointment booked. A property fraud specialist downtown named Adiez Okonkwo, sharp, fast, didn't waste a single word, which I appreciated more than I can say. She read my documents the same way I had. Signature first, then outward. The expired notary alone, she told me, was enough to challenge the whole loan. An expired commission makes the notarization invalid, and without valid notarization, the mortgage agreement can't be enforced. Then she looked up and asked if I knew who submitted the application. I have a strong suspicion, I said. She recommended a handwriting expert and a private investigator, and she warned me, gently, that this was going to get complicated if family was involved. I've done complicated, I said. The investigator's name was Raymond Sato. Quiet man, mid-50s, the kind of patience that comes from understanding that patience is the actual tool. When I told him what I needed, he listened without interrupting once. Give me 72 hours, he said. And in those 72 hours, I went through every document Renee had ever handed me to sign over those 4 months. 3 times she'd brought me papers, a tax adjustment form, a beneficiary update on an old life insurance policy. A consent form, she said, was tied to archiving my late wife's estate records. I'd glanced at the headers. I'd trusted my daughter. 2 of the 3 were exactly what she'd claimed. The third was a power of attorney for property, broad, clean, and signed with a version of my name that was just a little bit better than the one on the mortgage. Somebody had been practicing. I sat with that document in my hands for a long time. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. There's a particular kind of cold that goes through you when you hold the physical proof that your child sat at a kitchen table and practiced your signature in order to take your home. I photographed it. I sent it to a Daisy, and I called Raymond. I think I found the source document, I told him, the one they used to practice. He was quiet a moment. How many things did she bring you total? 3, I can confirm. That's actually helpful. It means they needed your signature and couldn't forge it cleanly on their own. They were still refining it. The mortgage signature wasn't perfect, I said, but it was good enough to pass a clerk. Most forgeries are, he said. People look for the obvious problems, not the subtle ones. Unless, of course, the person looking had spent 3 decades trained to see exactly the subtle ones, which was the one variable Trevor never put into his math. Raymond brought me his full report on a Thursday evening. He sat in my living room and opened the folder with the care of a man handling evidence, which is what it was. Trevor Maddox, he told me, had been running a private real estate investment fund for about 2.5 years. He'd collected just over $400,000 from 14 investors, most of them retirees up and down the mountains around Asheville. The fund was called Summit Ridge Property Group. The pitch was simple and old. He bought undervalued houses, fixed them up, sold them at a profit, and paid his investors 12% a year. I already knew where this was going. There were no renovated houses. There were 2 properties, Raymond said, both bought with investor money, both sitting empty, both already pledged as collateral on separate fraudulent loan applications. Trevor was using fresh deposits to make small payments to his older investors, just enough to keep them quiet. The whole thing was maybe 8 months from collapse. He needed a large injection of cash to survive. $260,000, I said. $260,000, Raymond confirmed. Pulled from my equity through a forged loan, with the payments redirected so I wouldn't see the wreckage until it was too late to undo it cleanly. And Renee, he said. His face didn't change. She's listed on the fund's materials as the Director of Investor Relations. She sat in on at least 7 investor meetings over the past year and a half. She understood the structure. I sat with that for a while. Not because it surprised me somewhere underneath all my professional certainty, I'd already known. But knowing a thing and hearing it read aloud from a report are 2 different weights entirely. One you carry in private, the other someone hands to you. There's one more piece, Raymond said. He slid a printed email exchange across the table. Trevor had been corresponding with a man named Curtis Vale, who ran something called Legacy Transition Consulting. His entire client list, as far as Raymond could trace it through public records, was made up of people who'd been investigated for exploiting elderly relatives. Vale was thorough, detailed. He'd coached Trevor on which documents to target, how to layer the mail redirection so it wouldn't trip postal fraud alarms right away, how to build a power of attorney that looked routine. He'd even suggested using an expired notary, pointing out that most lenders ran applications through automated systems that checked the formatting of a notary stamp, but didn't always verify the license in real time. This was planned, I said. From the very beginning, Raymond said. Around 9 months of it based on the email dates. I looked out my window at the half-acre, the land Trevor had asked about so casually, the land my wife and I had bought together, the grass I'd mowed every summer since she passed. Thank you, Raymond, I said. Send all of it to Adeezo Okonkwo. I want to pause here and say something to you directly, because I think it's the most important thing in this whole story. There was a line in one of those emails that I've never been able to put down. Trevor wrote it to Curtis Vale, talking about me. He wrote, "Her dad's completely checked out. Spends all day in the garage with old furniture. I doubt he even balances his own checkbook anymore. I balanced my checkbook every single month. I always had. It was a habit, like breaking my pen on the crossbar of my B. The small, consistent things a person does for 50 years without thinking, those are the things that quietly become the proof of who you actually are." He looked at those habits and saw a man who was finished. He never once stopped to ask what those habits actually meant. If you've ever had someone look right through you and decide you were done, decide you were too old or too tired or too simple to matter, I want you to remember Trevor Vale's arrogance, and I want you to remember what it cost him. Because contempt makes people careless. Every time. Now, let me try to be fair to the man, as hard as that is. Because I don't think Trevor woke up one day a monster. I read all his emails. I saw the dates. And what I saw underneath the scheming was a man drowning. His fund was collapsing. Real people. A retired school teacher. A man who'd run a small landscaping crew his whole life. A widow in her 70s who'd handed him $50,000. She'd saved over 40 years were going to come asking for money he no longer had. I think Trevor genuinely believed he was a businessman in a rough patch, not a thief. I think he told himself that one more injection of cash would let him fix everything and make everyone whole. He wasn't stealing my house. He was, in his own mind, saving his life. That's the thing about how good people go bad. It almost never feels like villainy from the inside. It feels like survival. That doesn't excuse a single thing he did, but it does explain it. And understanding the difference is exactly the work I did for 33 years. Adeezo moved fast. Within 3 days, she'd filed to invalidate the mortgage on the grounds of forged signature and expired notary, with a formal analysis from a handwriting expert named Gregory Lindquist, who'd testified in more than 200 fraud cases, and whose opinion carried precisely the weight it needed to. The loan was frozen, the foreclosure halted, and at the same time, on her own track, through her own channels, Diane Castellano opened a formal state investigation into Summit Ridge Property Group. I didn't orchestrate that part. I just made sure the right information landed in the right hands. The system does its own work once it has what it needs. 33 years taught me that truth, and I'd staked my whole career on it. 2 weeks after the filing, Trevor showed up at my house. Unannounced, a Sunday afternoon. I saw his car from the kitchen window, and I didn't rush to the door. I let him knock twice before I opened it. He looked different, thinner in the face. The polish was still there, but underneath it was something worn down and desperate, the look of a man who'd run the numbers and hated the answer. I knew that look. I'd watched it cross 100 faces in 100 rooms. "Walter," he said, "we need to talk." "Come in," I said. He sat at the same table, but nothing about him was the same. He leaned forward like a man who'd decided he had nothing left to lose by being direct. "I know you filed to block the foreclosure. I know you've been talking to people. I need you to understand, if this goes to court, it's going to get very public and very ugly. And Renee gets caught in the middle of it. Her name is on those fund documents. She could face charges. She is in the middle of it," I said. "She has been since she walked into my house with papers for me to sign. She was trying to help you. She didn't fully understand." I looked at him for a long moment. "She stood in my driveway this morning," I said, "when the recovery man came up my steps with a foreclosure notice for my own home. She stood there with her arms crossed, and she didn't say one word." He was quiet. "I have 9 months of emails between you and Curtis Vale, Trevor. Step by step. I let that sit between us. Renee is not an innocent bystander, I know that. But I am her father, and that means something to me no matter what she's done. So here's the only thing I'm going to say to you. The best outcome for my daughter is that you cooperate fully and reduce your exposure as much as possible. What you will not do is put her forward as the main party to save your own skin. Are we clear?" He stared at me. "You'd help her, after what we tried to do to you?" "I'd help her become someone who faces what she did and deals with it honestly," I said. "That's all I have to offer her. It's all I've ever had to offer anyone." I stood up, which told him the conversation was over. "Talk to a real lawyer, Trevor, and understand that the state investigation is not something I started and not something I can stop. That train left the station weeks ago." He left without another word. After that, it moved the way these things move when the evidence is clean and the timeline is documented, and nobody involved was clever enough to cover every trail. Adaize's challenge held. The forged mortgage was voided. My equity came home. The state investigation into Summit Ridge took 4 months. At the end, Trevor was charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and 2 counts of mortgage fraud. The 14 investors, the school teacher, the landscaper, the widow with her 40 years of savings, were named as victims eligible for restitution. Curtis Vale, the consultant who taught men how to rob their own families, was charged separately. Trevor's lawyer tried the same argument I'd watched a dozen times. A confused, overwhelmed entrepreneur. Poor decisions, not real intent. A harsh sentence would punish a young man for a first mistake. The judge wasn't moved. 9 months of planning emails, and the deliberate targeting of his own father-in-law, made the whole argument fall apart under its own weight. He got 5 years in federal prison and full restitution to all 14 investors. Renee's case was handled on its own. She cooperated once. It was clear cooperation was the only road that didn't end in a cell. She got 24 months of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and a mandatory financial fraud education course. The judge said something quiet to her that I've never forgotten. He told her she'd used her father's trust as a tool, and that whatever her reasons, a betrayal like that casts a very long shadow. She didn't look at me when he said it. I didn't look away. I couldn't. She was still my daughter. Curtis Vale got 3 years, and his consulting practice dissolved. The little world he'd worked in, people who specialize in teaching others how to exploit their own families, got a little smaller that day. I take some comfort in that. Not much, but some. A week after sentencing, Adaize called to confirm the title on Hartwell Lane was fully clear. No liens, no claims, just my name on my house, the same as it had been for 30 years. That evening I sat on my back porch and watched the sun drop behind the ridge. The half-acre stretched out behind me, the grass a little long from weeks of neglect. There was a section of fence along the east edge that had needed fixing since spring. A whole list of small, ordinary things that had been waiting while the large things demanded everything I had. This story taught me something I want to hand to you, in case you ever need it. The mistake most people make is believing that the people who would hurt them will look like monsters. They won't. They'll look like family at your kitchen table. They'll bring you groceries, and what they'll count on every single time isn't your weakness, it's your shame. They count on you being too embarrassed to look closely. So here is the one thing I'll ask you to do today, before you close this video. If anyone has ever asked you to sign something quickly, casually, without reading it, go back. Read it. Read every line. The 5 minutes you spend reading is the cheapest insurance you will ever buy. And here is the question I'll leave you sitting with, the one I still sit with myself. When your own gut warns you about someone you love, are you brave enough to listen, or will you talk yourself out of it the way I almost did? What Renee never understood, what nobody at that table understood except me, is that the truth doesn't shout. It waits. It sits quietly in the small, consistent details of a life until someone patient enough comes along to read it. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean that. I read these. If you think I did the right thing protecting my daughter after everything, comment a 1. If you think I was too soft on her and she deserved worse, comment a 2. And if you think I should have cut her out of my life completely, comment a 3. There's no wrong answer. I genuinely want to know how you see it. And tell me, where are you watching this from? And what time is it where you are right now? Drop your city. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you've ever had someone in your own family betray your trust over money, or even come close, tell me about it below. Because I promise you are not as alone in this as it feels. If this story meant something to you, do me one small favor and subscribe. It's just me telling true feeling stories about ordinary people and the quiet strength it takes to get through the hardest things. I'd be glad to have you here for the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Asheville, North Carolina to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.